What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, and this is the first episode in a new series I'm calling 5 Strange Facts, where we take a look at the weird side of gaming history. This week, the Resident Evil series turns 20 years old, and you know what? This is one of my favorite franchises of all time. It went from classic survival horror to crazy over-the-top action and a little bit of everything in between. To celebrate its birthday, we're going back through the pages of history to look at the most bizarre moments on my picks of 5 strange facts about Resident Evil. Number 5. It was originally a first-person shooter. A big part of what makes these games so terrifying is the sense of the unknown. With so many twisted monsters hunting you down and very little ammo to find, it builds this perfect feeling of unpreparedness for what's coming next. What really helped this nightmarish dread was the fact that it was all done with fixed camera angles. You could never see around the next corner, which is why it's a little bit odd to picture the early games as first-person shooters. In an interview, lead developer Shinji Mikami said that when they were originally working on the first project, they wanted to do two main things. They wanted the game to be full of bloody zombies, and they also wanted to have a first-person point of view, similar in the style of Doom. After some initial testing, the team quickly discovered that this ruined the terrifying atmosphere. Although they scrapped this idea at the time, later on they made not one, but 2 separate FPS Resident Evil games, and while they aren't exactly scary, they're definitely interesting to play and wonder what this series could have been from the start. Number 4. SpinOff Mixups. More than once, Capcom has found themselves stuck in a bad situation from signing a contract that they didn't fully understand. The first time this happened is while they were working on Resident Evil 3. This was intended to be a spin-off of the main games, a little side adventure to give us some extra perspective on the downfall of Raccoon City. During the design phase, Sony stepped in and reminded them that they'd actually agreed to make at least 3 full main Resident Evil games for their PlayStation console. Capcom had wanted Resident Evil Code Veronica to be the real Resident Evil 3. It was supposed to continue the story and introduce gamers to a lot of new gameplay mechanics and cutting-edge graphics, but because of this contract, they were forced to make Resident Evil Nemesis into a much grander thing. To make it seem like a more full experience, they added in a lot of side options, things like the Mercenaries minigame and the unlockable super weapons, anything to stall long enough for them to finish working on Code Veronica for the Sega Dreamcast. Due to this confining deal with Sony, both projects ended up radically different than they originally expected. Number 3. Accidentally hilarious acting. This franchise has become rather infamous for its comedically bad dialogue. Dramatic moments are often broken up by silly lines like Barry rescuing Jill from being crushed and saying, "You were almost a Jill sandwich." When it came time to record the English voices in Resident Evil 1 back in 1996, the developers just grabbed anyone who spoke good English and lived in Japan. They crammed them in a tiny sound booth, had them read their lines a few times, and called it quits. What's really odd is even though these games were bestsellers and they had a much bigger budget, they never really dedicated that much time to it. Even in follow-up sequels, they would still just grab essentially random people and have them play lead characters. Even as cheesy as this dialogue is, legendary film director George A. Romero actually wanted to make a movie based on these games. He was really moved by the overall story and offered to write the script and direct it. Capcom was flattered by the offer, but politely declined, though they did let him direct an awesome commercial for Resident Evil 2 in Japan. Number 2. Resident Evil May Cry. When most people think of this series, they probably imagine things like dark hallways, hard bosses, and evil corporations. What you probably don't imagine is something like a white-haired dude swinging a giant sword, but that's almost what we had. During the early 2000s, they were looking to shake up the Resident Evil franchise as a whole, to try and shift gears and make it more action-focused. For this task, the developers created Dante, a smart-mouth hero who saw even the deadliest enemy as a fun challenge. While working on the game, they realized that this was way too far removed from the rest of Resident Evil, and they were afraid of actually angering a lot of their core fans. Since everyone at the company loved playing the test build so much though, they decided to finish the game anyways, but under a totally new name. The project was rebranded Devil May Cry, and it became a huge success for Capcom. Even though Dante's an awesome character, I'm really glad he never joined the Resident Evil universe, because seeing him team up with Claire Redfield to shoot zombies would have just been way too much to handle. Number 1. Mysterious Unfinished Games. Over the last few years, gamers have been searching around online and they discovered clues hinting at unreleased Resident Evils. The first was a project simply called Resident Evil 1.5. It was to feature a woman named Elza Walker lost in Raccoon City, and it even had some RPG-style gameplay mechanics that let you upgrade your weapons and armor. It was very original and a big departure of the original Resident Evil, so I can see why they were a little bit nervous about releasing it. Eventually, they scrapped this build and just turned it into a Resident Evil 2. The next cancelled idea was a Game Boy Advanced version of Resident Evil. Capcom had long wanted to break into the handheld market, but they never quite made a splash as big as they intended. Sure, they came out with Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy Color, but it wasn't really the portable bestseller they needed. At this point, Resident Evil 2 was burning up store shelves, so they decided to try and port that onto the Game Boy Advanced, and as you can see, the results were not very good. Although it showed a lot of promise, the company quietly abandoned it. What's definitely the most interesting of all these incomplete projects, though, is the original version of Resident Evil 4. The plot was to revolve around Leon Kennedy being infected with the T-virus and slowly losing his mind. To keep players scared, many of the mechanics were based on hallucinations. In this leaked gameplay, we see ghostly figures, a laughing deer's head, and even a creepy killer with a giant hook chasing our character down. That is some seriously dark imagery, and it really makes me crave actually getting to play this build of the game. Overall, Resident Evil has had a very strange history indeed, and I greatly look forward to seeing what Capcom throws at us next. Did your favorite piece of trivia not make the list? Got an idea for a future episode? Leave it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. For those of you who made it all the way to the end, I'm going to give you a little sneak peek. I want to do one of these episodes a month, and this is what I'm thinking about doing next month. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, maybe check out my last video. Please subscribe, and if you want, share this somewhere with your friends.